Hi everyone, I hope you're all doing well. My name is Rebecca Jolly. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a museum associate in curatorial research at the Wingate Museum of Art. I am very excited to welcome you to this evening's program, which is a lecture by the wonderful Hannah McBroom on transgender art as a history. The program is co-sponsored by Transit Hendrix, which is the student organization dedicated to providing representation, advocacy, networking, and support for Hendrix's transgender students. The event is held in conjunction with one of our current exhibitions entitled No Man's Land, A Feminist Reimagining. The show features 11 women artists who have some connection to the state of Arkansas and whose work centers the female body. You can find more information about the exhibition online at wingatemuseum.org, and you can also make reservations to see the show in person, which is exciting. And while we are hosting this evening's program virtually, we want to take time to acknowledge that the Wingate Museum of Art at Hendrix College occupies the traditional homelands of the Osage, Quapaw, and Caddo, and we offer our respect and gratitude to the Indigenous peoples who have cared for the land over generations. So I am now excited to hand things over to Roth Coates, who is the current president of Transit Hendrix, and was so nice to help us sponsor this event, so he can introduce himself and Hannah.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. So as mentioned, I am Roth Coates. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm a senior and the president of Transit Hendrix. We do things throughout the year, such as events that are closed just to trans students to provide that community on campus. We do educational events, most recently, a talk on the most recent legislation affecting trans people in the state of Arkansas. And we do some bigger events like in collaboration with this that are also open to everyone, regardless if they're trans or not. I would like to shout out Rebecca real quick before I introduce Hannah. Because the one thing she did not mention about the show is that No Man's Land is actually her senior's thesis. And so she's put so much hard work into it, and you can tell through the events and also through the show how passionate she is. So I will be introducing Hannah McBroom. She was born in 1993 in Columbus, Mississippi, graduated from Mississippi State University with a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Studio Art with an emphasis in painting. She received a Master's of Fine Arts from the University of Arkansas in 2019, and her work explores themes of transgender identity, materiality, alienation, and the body. She has attended residencies at the Vermont Studio Center and the Chautauqua School of Art. McBroom has exhibited in many shows nationally and internationally, including the Red Clay Survey, Manifest Tapped, International Painting Annual number 6 in 2015, and again in 2018 for number 9. She is the recipient of the Artist 360 grant through the Mid-American Artists Coalition. Thank you so much for being here, Hannah, and I'm going to pass it off to you.
Get set up. All right, thank you so much, Roth, with that introduction and just for like helping with just like hosting. Okay, is the screen, I can't see y'all, but can y'all see the slide presentation?
Yes, everything looks great.
Okay, good. All right, we're gonna click on here and then, oh no, it's breaking. All right. All right, I just want to open and just say thank you again, Roth, for the introduction, as well as Rebecca and Sarah, just for making all this happen, and especially Rebecca for the invitation to participate. So I'm grateful to be able to participate in the exhibition itself. This is the piece that you're seeing on the screen is what you came for, which is the basis for this talk. And it was produced in my thesis year at the University of Arkansas in 2019. My hopes for this talk is to convey not only the history needed to interpret a piece similar to this, but to also leave you with a new perspective on art and the vehicle it acts through. And I'm going to be talking a lot about exploitation and trans narrative, going back 100 years ago and maybe a little bit more. I'm aiming to talk for 30 to 40 minutes and have plenty of time, hopefully, at the end for questions. I want to open kind of with this quote from Roger Brubaker, who writes in Trans, which is his book title, Identity as a Social Relation, Not an Individual Property. And this is kind of how I have kind of formed my own identity as not being my own, but a relationship. And this property or relationship depends on recognition and validation from others and is therefore vulnerable to challenge and disruption. This talk, while focused on the arts and the art world, is aimed at representation of individuals like myself who aim for recognition or other goals within our current day. If you're left wanting more at the end of this talk, a really good documentary right now is Disclosures on Netflix. I cannot encourage this documentary enough. There is also, if you feel you need to reach out to me for more questions or just have a conversation, I love to talk. This is my handle on Instagram. And I would highly encourage everyone to go to intransitive.org right now or later and check out their open letter. They are doing a wonderful job counteracting the legislation currently in Arkansas, as well as 30 other states. And you can sign their petition to boycott, as well as read other tools that you have at your disposal as for being an advocate. In opening, I want to ask a kind of like a rhetorical question. In this, if anyone is an English major, I apologize. If you close your eyes right now and you try to describe the word transgender, what does that look like? And maybe even how trans or transgender acts or presents itself, and asking that, and you're like, where does that idea kind of originate? Is it coming from like a movie, a friend, newspaper, internet? And is it a positive or problematic descriptor? And I kind of want to focus on like the why, or like the origin point in this talk. And where does that, that originate? There's a nature of exploitation and agency within asking that. And it comes from that. The idea of an identity read through social relations means the relation of ourselves to another is always going to be subjective. Passing anyone on the street, there's a typical habit to read, I'm putting that in quotations, another via their clothes, their gait, their mannerisms. Any purveyor of a drag race can recount the meaning to read when critiquing the fashion or other like choices of the performer. The queen with the best read wins, but unlike drag queens, the trans body, and here I'm including in my talk, trans is also included as an umbrella term. So I don't want to be exclusionary to anyone who is within that. The trans body, as well as LGBT body, is made up of a continuous inscribed body that bears the multitudes of recreating and articulating something of a gender identity and form, which is a sense of belonging to a community, either socially or politically. This talk is not going to be perfect and it's reached our aim. There has been a number of things that have been happening in the last month that I would love to have talked about, but it's just what I've been wanting to focus on. But with that being said, I'm going to kind of launch into the opening, which is I've titled Ed Wood's Lacanian Wood. Anyone who is a fan of obscure movies, you would probably recognize Ed Wood, who in 1956 wrote and directed the most horrendous film titled Plan 9 from Outer Space. In his career, he also produced a film called Glend or Glenda, which as an exploitation film bears a message of both tolerance and acceptance to those who are different from normative individuals. And this kind of complicated reading, I kind of want to expand on what it means to have like a reading of trans narrative. I want to make an argument that this is one of the better films depicting trans societal violence while still relying on exploitation. So it's still complicated, but I think positive overall. The film opens with a scene of a suicidal individual who's taken their own life after being arrested several times for cross-dressing. And this is like the 1950s. So this is kind of, unfortunately, not really common, but not really talked about either. The story, while not the best, overall depicts Ed Wood, the director, as the transvestite Glenn/Glenda, wrestling with the fears of coming out as a trans person. And the film was meant to be based off of the pop icon Christine Jorgensen, who transitioned about 4 years prior to that and was actually Wood's the director's own secret desire to transition and the fears of being outed. So it is very much an autobiographical film about Ed Wood, who we see here in the green dress, being escorted kind of by the detective character in the background. This period is also of the film's production is chronicled in Tim Burton's film Ed Wood from 1996, which is very fun to watch, very weird. It's worth a watch. So in watching films and looking at paintings, there's always a framing, and Wood is utilizing an earlier type of framing of trans representation, which is the exploitation of trans bodies as a sensation, but again, a little bit more subjective. It was a box office flop, and it was successful that time period in showing a more open view of a type of fear trans people face with either being identified or being misrepresented in social settings. From the 1950s to where we are now, I want to turn to a different type of media, which is framed as a way a society could begin to imagine the trans imaginary. While Wood's film did saturate a portion of society, it wasn't able to fully saturate the general zeitgeist due to its extreme representation outside the recognized norm at the time. Instead of the smaller produced box office opening, trans exploitation films and other films later on are responsible for maybe less than 1% of the total openings. And that's a very generous number. It has grown over the last 10 years, but still very small. And I think in the bulk of this is media depictions represent only like a minuscule spectrum of the transgender community, which essentially conveys that those that are shown are the only interpretations and ideas society has of them, which is unfortunate, as I'm going to go through this. Through exploitation of trans individuals, the most common and easily accessible, I'd argue, is pornography, or a form of serial media depicting the sexuality or imagined sexuality of trans persons before the trans tipping point of 2016, which was an article which was writing about Janet Mock on your right and then Laverne Cox on your left. So kind of turning to like a very stereotypical, porn magazine that's easily accessible is Playboy. And in 1995, we have Caroline Cossey, who is on your left, and in the October 1995 cover of Playboy, and it's titled, "Would You Sleep with This Woman?" If we go back 4 years earlier, Causey is mentioned as Tula in their September 1991 issue, and you can see that in the bottom right hand in white is a boy, it's a girl, it's Tula, and that was her stage name that she used to model. The problematic posing of Cozy and the male garb, unzipping her pants to reveal the imaginary penis, doesn't need to be described as anything other than problematic. She was a trans woman at the time, but because of her modeling career, she didn't really want this disclosed, but because Playboy was able to get a hold of this information as well as the media, they were able to kind of sensationalize and in place exploiting the nature. So we have this imaginary penis coming out of the pants. Around the same time, like the first depiction of Jerry Springfield in 1994 had also a trans woman in their audience or in the actual performance, which was another form of exploitation. So around the 90s, we have a lot of different an outgrowth of trans media, at least in the common spectrum. And in the 90s, this kind of framing not only reinforces the idea and stigma of trans people, but it sets up a dynamic of passing, which is a kind of racial idea or a racist idea in its foundation. Passing is acting within the fold, being non-queer. Cossey was able to be on the cover and model because of her ability to cross over the typical boundaries of male and females in that understanding. She was recognized as a female, but othered, and I'm putting other into quotation by the language and framing of these two issues that we have here on the screen. And Bell Hooks, she writes about othering in 1992, again, the 90s, which I love for some reason, that's where I come from. But the acknowledged other must assume the recognizable form. And this may be well, but when an identity doesn't fit into that recognizable form, the potential for violence occurs. And we see that in Trans Day of Remembrance, everyone who is not recognized in that form, it happens. But this type of pornography is encoded on top of a matrix of shifting language. And on top of it, the transitioning body is produced through social interactions of normal and traditional roles of cis womanhood. And I'm putting that way, way into quotations. So around the 90s and currently, you had a lot of easily accessible pornography as well as movies and shows. But I'm interested in the earlier depictions of pornos that were harder to obtain, at least now easy back then. In the 40s, 50s, and 60s, gay erotica was marketed as a bodybuilding magazine for the gay male gaze. Prior to 1962, it was illegal to publish photographs featuring the male nudity in the US. And there was a Supreme Court decision in 1962 of Manuel Enterprises Incorporated versus Day. And what resulted is we could actually show depictions of the male physique, but it had to be costumed or light clothing. And so we have bodybuilders from that period would wear costume pieces like the Roman gladiator or the sailor boy to avoid the censorship laws and the unsuspecting eye, the heteronormative readership. And here we have that as physique pictorial, which was a popular one, as well as Grecian Guild pictorial, also part of the Roman gladiator idea. These are all very popular readership, but along with that, trans pornos, they were and still marketed as more problematic ones, as the sissy, she-male, and other fantastical fetishist objects of the male gaze, but published much later after some of the censorship laws were raised. Trans-related pornos from the magazine stand as are still able to be published, but there exists from the 1980s and 90s. And I have yet to figure out what that is about. There has yet to be any new published porn about trans women that is at the, I think that just has to be to do with the magazine distribution. It's probably not as popular, but so we just have this regurgitated thing from the 90s and early 2000s. And magazines like the Transsexual Climax, which have a confusing mix of trans and cross-dressing imagery and narratives, don't define a clear separation between the two, transgender and cross-dresser, which is the bulk of this. I can go to any adult store today and pick up a copy of Gender Benders, Hung Honeys, and Nuts on Sluts, all originating from the 80s and 90s. These or like the verbiage originates. It wasn't until 2017 that the She-Male Yum Studio became Groovy Girls and announced the disavowal of any derogatory term, which led to multiple sites, including Pornhub, to change the category from she-male to transgender in 2019. So 2 years ago, we were still using she-male under the category of trans, and that has still populated into today's usage. So this is a huge issue still today. So here, wait, it's not going. All right, so here we have a cross-dresser like leaving a police wagon from 1939 entitled The Gay Deceiver by Ouija. I'm gonna leave this up on the screen. On the right is Thomas Ernest Bolton and Frederick William Park, two Victorian cross-dressers from 1871. So we have 1939, 1871. Thomas and Frederick were both suspected homosexuals who were charged with conspiring and inciting persons to commit a natural offense. The prosecution failed to establish that they had anal sex, and then they were acquitted, fortunately. Going back to this kind of murking of cross-dressing and trans identity, Susanna Stryker, she kind of goes into the idea or into the history. In the United States, Columbus, Ohio, the earliest law for anti-cross-dressing was 1848, forbidding people from appearing in public in a dress not belonging to his or her sex. that was later overturned in 1974. These laws became a flexible tool for police to enforce normative gender on multiple gender identities, including masculine women and people identifying as transgender or gender nonconforming, with the majority of the targeted groups being perceived cis men dressing as women. That was the fear. It was a form of police harassment during the 1970s, with a number of the laws and ordinances being overturned in that decade and the following decade due to the counterculture movement. But we see these kind of regurgitate around 2015, 2016 with the North Carolina bill. There's a number of videos of butch cis women in restrooms being arrested by police officers because they appeared as masculine. Like, so this history kind of repeats itself in a way, which is unfortunately like comical and horrifying at the same time. And so for every day I'm interpreted and people like me with questions about my sexual preferences and genitalia from strangers on dating websites because of origination of the porn and what it has become. Since they were so easy to obtain around any point in time, they eclipse the many autobiographies and journals and literature that try to contain trans personhood in a positive light. Celebrities in the early 20th century were limited to people like Christine Jorgensen on the right, April Ashley, and Lily Elby, who's on the left. So how did these forms of being enter the public consciousness? Pre-Laverne Cox and Janet Mock, which is 2016, the trans tipping point. There's a few answers, but I wanted to focus on the easily accessible, which is the more easily accessible, which is the silver screen. Movies like The Crying Games and Boys Don't Cry, which you see here. The screen were films produced during the 90s, which featured trans women in their plot or primary narrative. But I like to argue that TV sitcoms like Monty Python, Looney Tunes, South Park, Family Guy, The Jerry Springer Show were the more popular form exposure to trans people. The murky meshing of trans and cross-dresser identities has created a stereotype of these individuals as one and the same, while being the joke or the thing to be feared. Fortunately, the last 10 years has produced an abundance of trans content where trans individuals are seen in a positive light and not the butt of a joke or something secret to be revealed. There's been progress, but the artifact of the material produced prior remains in the public consciousness. So even though we still have this content, I'm still called a she-male, and I'm still asked about these things. And so there's still that problem. And here, like, what do you do with that? There's a confusion in the representation in most media is of a trans representation or a cross-dressing because of the comedy aspect or the misunderstanding. It's a slippage between the two where the interpretation often relies on one's personal history and the choices the producers make in sharing a person in opposition to the normative performance. This difference is often understood and misinterpreted as deviant or something to be revealed. If you ever watch Jerry Springer, there's always someone disclosing their secret, and it's bad. Trans here is misunderstood as cross-dressing, which is later interpreted of a homosexual nature. So we're going almost like back in time. And I think going back to like, further back, like how does that even start? We have a miscommunication and its origin point, which is Foucault identifies in 1978 as the creation of sex as a body of knowledge, and one lying within a biology of reproduction and the other as a medicine of sex. So the medicine and the reproduction are reinforcing each other in a way. Neither are the two with no real exchange except the biology, which could confirm the latter or distribution of said ideas. Herein lies the issue. Medical and other systems of power sought to contain the human body within a dualistic divide, one male, the other female. This task is proven beyond impossible, even after multiple centuries of scientific and political advancement. But even before this formation of sex within the language and history, there was instances of bodies that lay beyond cis-normative. Intersex bodies took on social and historical roles, even if there were no distinguished named roles for these bodies. And we kind of have a weird interpretation of that from like early in history. If we took 100 years back, Victorian doctors puzzled as to how to best categorize individuals with ambiguous sex characteristics into two and only two distinct true human sexes. If we have normative female nudes going back to Michelangelo's period, we have these bodies that are, I would argue, of trans women. The sitters are most likely male with later added feminine features such as breast and androgynous features. Even the androgynous characteristics of Renaissance painting lends itself to Raphael and the Saint Catherine of Alexandria, who we have on the right. If you notice the collarbone, it's more masculine in how it's presented. These symptoms or lack of femininity or masculinity or just confusion come from the several different factors from this time period. Even the fresco, The Triumph of Galatea, I'm not pronouncing that right, I'm sorry, any historians, on the left is, we see the nymph Gal, I've tried to look this up, it's not gonna work, but she's looking heavenward, the goddess or the nymph. The love song of her monstrous suitor nearby, and the cherubs ready to pierce her flesh with the bolts. Yet there's a similar ambiguity in Raphael's depiction of gender in both accounts. The torso is masculine, but her face is feminine. She's identified as feminine. So they're using male bodies and putting female features on top, again, similar to Michelangelo. Okay, so I want to kind of turn to a little bit more modern depiction. So this is, I think, Matrix from 1999 from Judith Butler's series. I want to, not Judith Butler, Jenny Saville, sorry. Judith Butler does, I want to open with from giving an account. She talks about giving an account thus takes a narrative form, which not only depends upon the ability to relay a set of sequential events with plausible transitions, but also draws upon narrative voice and authority, being directed toward an audience with the aim of persuasion. And here we have, Matrix from 1999 and Passage from 2004. We have basically two trans people sitting for Seville, and in both the genitals are the main focus of the works, with them being primarily in the forefront. The first one of Matrix is Della Grace, while Passage's sitter is only known as Carla. Dale is a intersex artist and photographer who has gone by, in later years, she, him pronouns and multi-gender. If this is from the 90s, early 2000s, so a little bit different. Here we have an example of their work on the left. But unfortunately, we only have Carla from Passage, and we only know her as Carla, who was located in a transvestite cafe in Rome during Seville's stay in Europe. So already we have a murking of the agency within the sitters' portraits. Back to my notes. So we're kind of hard pressed to navigate the agency, because we have these genitalia just hanging in the front. It dominates the sitter's presence, because it's the primary introduction and simultaneously the reduction of the understanding of that person. The study of Seville's Passage from 1990 or 2004 was shown alongside Courbet's The Origin of the World from 1866 during the 2013 auction at Sotheby's, which kind of reinforces the sensationalism and focus of the genitalia as the focus of the work. And this is problematic for a number of reasons. There's also something that the way Seville had talked about, these two works is, while she was working with Dale one-on-one to kind of create this blurring of gender lines, there was this misunderstanding of what, trans persons were for Seville, who was depicting and giving the voice for these two persons. This is a direct quote from her. With the transvestite, I was searching for a body that was between genders. I was looking for a kind of contemporary architecture of the body. I wanted to paint a visual passage through gender and a sort of gender landscape. And so here we have a few problems and interesting points, but I think the most glaring one is transvestite and her use of that. She's not calling Dale a transvestite or Carla, but she is thinking of and kind of misinterpreting the main bulk of the problem, which is, transvestite is a form of cross-dressing, while transsexual is in relation to medical or social transitioning as well as trans. So already we have this issue with language within how she's approaching her project. An opposite approach is the piece Juliana, between a collaboration with Juliana Huxtable, artist, and Frank Benson, also an artist. Here we have Juliana Huxtable herself and her art series, her portrait series. She's a interdisciplinary artist who does like a lot of things: DJing, photography, writing. And her collaboration with Benson resulted in a commentary on the female figure within the museum structure as the reclining Venus now intersects Black women. And the technology even to create the piece, which is around 64 inches by 54 inches, so very, very large, almost as large as or tall as she is, I would assume. It was created with 3D scanning and printing technologies to produce the sculpture, which was kind of amazing in advancing definitions of what sculpture could be, but also existing normative bodies and how they are created. So it was very amazing for its time period. And also to note, Seville's paintings are also very large too. So we have two large pieces that are right in your face. But the important distinction is the collaboration doesn't make the main focus about Huxtable's genitalia, which is a positive breakaway. The primary focus is Juliana, which is the title. It centers the piece about a person's body rather than a body, which is the issue with Carla or Clara. What I want to argue is that the agency within these two examples, between Clara and Dale and Juliana, with the portrait of Clara, we have no dialogue from herself except Seville, and we have to trust her. And that's what Clara wanted. And with Huxtable, we have a modest bit of discussion from their point of view. And then with Dale's portrait, there's still agency from his perspective on the matter. It has been recorded, but it is an disservice to the conversation needed to understand the piece within a trans intersex history. In both instances, the form of erasure of the three persons is a reduction to the body, and one that exists through the mouthpiece of forms and pages of the gallery publications. The exploitation that exists is previously in history. It hasn't changed, only the medium. So these are, brief readings into how trans imagery has shaped an understanding of the bodies we see on TV, museums, and the everyday. As a reading of history is important, we continually re-examine our history and understandings. Trans is one of the few personhoods that can be undone, either through medical and social acts, either intentionally or unintentionally. And we have seen this in the last month with the Arkansas legislation, as well as other states. Trans personhoods, however, are not images. They are individuals who are constantly performing a gender, yet somehow never reaching their destination. And since the beginning of something called a trans history, we have been the subject of study and emergence. I can name only a handful of films and shows where a trans person was not discovered, becoming, but instead themselves without revealing a secret. There needs to be more support and platforms given to trans persons, so not to be seen, heard, and one day hopefully accepted as human. And I'm going to end the talk and open things up for discussion and questions. So. All right. I think we have a question from Mary Dane. I'm not sure how this is going to work. Roth, Rebecca.
Yeah, I can go ahead and keep an eye
Yeah.
on the chat and the participants list and call on folks. So Mary Dan.
I'm sorry, I accidentally put my hand up, but it was a great talk. I really enjoyed it. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for listening.
I can kick us off with a question then, which is, could you speak a little more about your piece and talk about your piece and your voice in it?
Yeah, so what you came for is I was in my thesis year and I was trying to describe, what it's like to be trans. And I had a discussion with a friend in a hot tub, and she's like, "You're not being to the point. You're not being, you're being too safe." And so with this piece, I was actually imagining my corpse and someone coming upon it. Because at the time I was, coming out of my shell, I was going to, the gay clubs, I was going out with friends, but there was always this fear of being like discovered or othered and having violence put onto my body, either from like a cis white male who disagreed, because I was in a red state, Arkansas, which is, I think, Missouri as well, I'm not entirely sure. And so while I was still trying to, come out of my shell and have fun, there was this kind of fear that, I was going to die at some point. And Black trans women are unfortunately the ones who die the most, 75% of the time. I'm going to be in the safer majority, but it's still a messed up situation. And so I was wanting to create a piece that kind of talked about this fear and this kind of reality of being alive, but still dead or to be dead. And so the piece has this almost dead, almost alive look, which I was kind of looking for, and also a posture collar, which is used in BDSM as a piece of gear. And so I was wanting, my body has been fetishized for a long time. And so I was kind of wanting to allude to this nude body emerging from the top portions and then hyperextended just to, reveal the non-Adam's apple. One of the key signatures of being, trans woman is like that right there. So it was kind of a learning piece as well. I was just like, how much can I say without saying too much? So.
I can keep asking questions until someone raises their hand or sends something in the chat. You can also direct message me on the chat if you don't want to put it, out in the world for everyone to see. But, my experience as a trans man is incredibly different from yours, even though we both fit under the trans umbrella.
Right.
Do you think that historically that's partially because trans men aren't as attractive or aren't as seen in the they aren't as pleasing to the male gaze, and they don't fit that history of pornography, stuff like that? And do you think that has made murder rates and other things so drastically different? Comes back to pornography.
Well, so Buck Angel, very well known trans male porn star who has also done a lot for the trans advocacy program as well as sexual health. He's fun to look into. He actually made headlines with that. But I think, to go back to your question, it's not really, it's a social and medical question. I think the answer can be found there. One, it's easier to pass as masculine without being discovered. If, the typical trope of the Jerry Springer show was like a hairy masculine man masquerading as a woman, which was cross-dressing laws. Those are easier to spot. We've been kind of drilled into looking for the hairy-legged transvestite on the street. That was even in the Powerpuff Girls and the Haley Barber era, the cartoons from the 1980s and 90s. But with trans men and butch, it's more socially acceptable. So it's not really less desirable, it's just less noticed. And then with the medical advancements, it's easier to transition to masculine. You have I have a number of, trans men I'm following on like Instagram, and they're bearded, they have, modulated voices, but they also have like, pecs and abs, and they're hairy. It's easier for, trans men to transition and be passing, while trans women have to like take off like the bone fissures that, come from years of transitioning through, testosterone. So it's a reduction process if you're thinking of sculpture with trans women, and an additive process with trans men. So it's multiple answers for that question. Thank you.
So one question is, how is your current art making influenced by your sense of self?
So, okay. Thank you, Ray, for that question. It's good to see you. Enjoyed your talk as well. Ray was also in the last exhibition at the Wingate, so I didn't get to see it, but it was also good. My current art making, influenced by my sense of self, it's come with a lot of patience and resolve. I think being a trans woman and just being a woman is, and I can't speak for all women, but myself, it involves a lot of withholding rage and the understanding that while I'm being othered and being controlled by like, medical and legislative acts against my body, I still have to be formal and part of a society. And so it's, how do I do that without, being the crazy hysterical woman? And so when it comes to actually making pieces, how best do I do that without alienating someone? And so it's been kind of like for myself, I've been reading, actually a good way to do it for myself, I have to do a lot of reflection, honestly, before I can actually make a piece. Because if I just go off and do like a crazy cartoon, it's just going to be fun. So this is a fun book I've been reading, Invisible Lives. And I've had to like re-question like what I've been making. Vivian Namaste has been writing it. And she's, one of the things she goes into is, are they going, I haven't actually looked at their genders. I don't quite know, I'm going to say. They're actually talking about like, the trans literary criticism hasn't really evolved in the last 20 years. And so it's all been about, the discovery, the becoming, the existence of trans people, but it hasn't been about the actual trans person in life. It hasn't been about them, with sex work or the actual counting of trans people, or even like the counting of the murders. There's no real accountants of trans people outside of a literary or medical gaze. And so she's kind of wanting that too. So like, I think for myself, moving forward with my own art career, it's going to be about, just me existing in the world and having a normal, quote unquote, life, and maybe bringing other voices into that, because I can only speak for myself. I can't speak for anyone else. So.
So, in your talk, you mentioned passing, and you mentioned the concept of passing in terms of gender, and also passing in terms of race. And so someone was wondering if you could speak a little more to that.
Yeah, so I don't know where that is. So I think the idea of passing has a lot to do with privilege. If you're queer, you're operating under a lens of being separate from the normative lens, from the normative. Sorry, I'm babbling right now. Passing is an idea. We have set standards of behaviors for what is normative or what is normal. You're not really allowed to yell in the streets unless you're being violated. And so for myself, if I was a trans woman with a beard, that would, go against it. But a lot of trans women, including like minorities and people of color, don't have the same access to medical care, to especially really anyone. if you don't have the financial means, which a lot of people of color do not have the means to transition, as well as just people who are impoverished, it's impossible to kind of transition in a way that is safe. A lot of trans people I know are going to Starbucks because Starbucks offers, healthcare that allows, trans women to transition fully, even facial feminization surgery, which, for anyone paying out of pocket is $50,000. That's cosmetic surgery. And so I think there's a small asset of the community that is only focused on the look, the idea of passing, and not about helping, the trans sisters, brothers, and indies who are struggling either in the streets or in, jobs that don't allow them to live a safe, healthy life. And so there's the wealthy community or the wealthy trans body that is only focused on that idea and never on the people who are struggling beneath them, which is always going to be either a person of color or someone who is financially not well off. So that, I think that is what I'm talking about when it comes to passing, is a racial idea or a racist idea.
So we have two questions that actually go really wonderfully together, which is Dr. Lopas asking about your process and how you actually paint. And then, let's see, I'm losing the old question, but asking if we could see some more of your work. If you have any images on hand, then maybe combining those two.
Yeah, definitely. Let me pull up my website. So, sorry, that was actually dinner from earlier. Where am I? Share screen. Hey, you want to come in? Yeah, this is my girlfriend, Allie. Okay, can y'all see that? Can y'all see the screen on the left?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, great. All right, so this is my website, HannahMcBroom.com, and these are some of my paintings. My process is in regards to the technicality or the technical challenges of painting. It's very small. I was a good artist to kind of think about, building blocks for painting for myself is Ewan Uglo. That's E-A-U-N or U-G-L-O. He's a British artist, but he thought of the body as the Coldstream method of building up the body through geometric shapes. And so I was also influenced by, quilting from my mom's workshop or her own studio practice. And so here, if you were to break down each aperture of, the limbs, the hair, the eyes, the face, they are segments of like a rag doll that's kind of fitted together. And they all have distinct colors and shapes and also textures to them. And so the paintings are kind of built up from what I call like really dumb color blocks and shapes, colors, and then they get more and more specific. I use oil painting as well as charcoal sticks. And so I start with like a very light oil ground, which is oil and Gamsol, which is a non-toxic solvent. And it's still toxic, not as toxic as carcinogens that are in normal solvents. And so I just, over time, put thick over thin. I'm building up the layers until they become a little bit more complex. Here we see this one, all this green in the background is transparent and you can see the canvas underneath. Well, here we have glitter in the snake. And so I'm actually grinding up, I basically mail ordered glitter from China. It was cheap and I mixed that into Damar varnish and lay that over the paint itself. And you can actually do, I think it's like 1:3 ratio or 1:4. You can actually get almost like a paste-like material while still having like the glistening paint effect of oil, which I personally love. I have never been able to do acrylic, but I envy people who can do that. So these are works from the last 2 years. This one's about 6 feet by 6 feet. I do like the larger paintings, but I found, I've gotten older. I don't want to move as much. And so I kind of want to stand in front of smaller ones, but I still like the kind of movement of having to reach up and paint a section. And this one's actually my largest one, which is 84 by 72. And so it's actually sewn in the middle because I didn't have the money at the time. And so I was having to sew together sections and stretch them. Yeah, so I think that hopefully answers that. Yeah.
Let's see, I'm not seeing any hands or anyone else. So I think as a thought, I'm sure Sarah and Rebecca may have something to say before we actually close.
Okay.
But what is something you hope that we all learned today? What do you hope we take from this?
I was hoping to I didn't want to talk about my own work. I wanted to talk about, the context to understand my work, but also to understand a beginning introduction to, the trans world. I wanted you to ask more questions. And there's a lot more to talk about with the trans histories. And there's a lot more to be gained. I think if there's more information you want to know, is intransitive.org has a lot of information. But I forgot the question actually.
What do you hope for us to learn today?
What was I pressed to learn, or?
What do you hope that we learned today from you?
Yeah, just a really rough introduction to trans history and the exploitation of trans bodies through imagery and movies and porn, and just that original thought of what trans is to you. Where does that come from? So those are the rough building blocks. Thank you, Sarah.
I definitely learned a lot. And thank you so much for coming and being a part of this, and everybody that is able to definitely come to the museum. Yes, Sarah just sent the link.
Yes.
Come to the museum to see Hannah's work in person. It is absolutely incredible. So I am going to pass it over to Rebecca to close us out and also talk about some of the other events that are going to be happening soon.
Yeah, I just want to echo Roth's thanks on behalf of the museum and me. Thank you so much, Hannah, for coming and giving this talk. It was so informative and so wonderful, and there are so many comments in the chat that agree with me, who are very complimentary of your work and your talk. So thank you again on behalf of all of us for coming. Just a couple quick things to point you to in the chat. There are links to Intransitive's website, Hannah's website, and then also the museum's website. So those are all great resources to look at. And just a couple other events we'll plug really quickly coming up. On Wednesday, we have a panel of LGBTQ artists who are talking about their experience as female artists working in the South. So that'll be a panel discussion that'll end with a Q&A segment like this talk. I'd highly encourage you to come. It's at 7. And then next Wednesday on the 28th, we have a lecture by Dr. Rachel Buller, who's going to talk about maternal bodies in art history. So those are 2 events to look forward to as we say goodbye. But thank you again, Hannah, for doing this, and thank you all for coming. And have a good evening.